And I realized very quickly they had no plan. They had no presentation for the interview the next morning, and they were rapidly trying to pull something together. It just went, we don't have a chance in the world of winning this job.
Welcome to the AEC Growthcast from PSMJ Resources, hosted by President Gregory Hart. This no theory, no fluff episode shares real takeaways from the top AEC experts who know what works in today's competitive market.
Hello and welcome to the AEC Growthcast. My name is Gregory Hart, president here at PSMJ Resources. Thanks for joining us for this episode. In this episode, we're going to be getting into a topic that we haven't been talking about a whole bunch lately, and that is business development, right? For a lot of firms over the past several years, things have been really, really good. And for a lot of firms, they still are really, really good. But when do you go out and look for work? When do you put interest and investment and efforts and focus on business development? You do that before you need the work, right? Business development is part of a culture, part of an ongoing system and process in the firm, not something you do just when you need new work, right? That's how firms grow. And with that, I thought it'd be great to kick things off with the metric of the month that is particularly relevant to that topic. So we recently released our AE Financial Performance Benchmark Survey for 2026. That's our annual survey with a whole bunch of financial and operating metrics and KPIs for the AE firms. And it's easy to talk at the outset about things like profitability, utilization, direct labor multipliers. Those are always the ones that get the bulk of all of the attention, rightfully so. But there are a couple other metrics in there that don't get a lot of attention, but can be very telling in terms of the overall health of the industry. One of those is the net backlog change from the prior years. We asked you to look at what was your net backlog right now, and that's at December 31st. So that was almost, 6 or 7 months ago, compared to the December 31st prior to that. Now, the important piece when you look at that, again, we're just measuring the change in those two values. For this most recent survey, that metric was 5%, 5.0%. Backlogs are still growing. They grew by 5% from the prior year. If you look back last year, the 2025 survey, that value was 11.1%. Again, I said it was 5% in this most recent survey. The year before that, 12.7%. Year before that, 15.3%. Year before that, 16.1%. I think you can see the trend that I'm trying to call out here, that the percentage increase in backlog has been consistently going down and is now at 5.0, which is the lowest it's been, at least in the past 5 years. Certainly, if you look at the data, I'd say the lowest, put aside COVID, since probably about 2012 or so, since we started the financial performance survey many, many, many years ago. So not doom and gloom, still growing, but again, it's just more proof positive that focusing on business development is something you need to be doing now and not waiting until you see the softness. Those values I just gave were the median values across the data set in the financial survey. So lots of folks above that, lots of folks beneath that. But don't be reactive on business development, I think is the message there. And get in front of it where you can. Lots of stuff you can do there. With that, we're going to jump into our conversation with Tim Griffin, because we talk a lot about some of the things you can do to create a business development culture and where work really is won or lost, that is in the project interviews. So great conversation with Tim. Let's jump right into that. I'm excited to have, this might be the most anticipated guest I've had for the AEC Growthcast so far. It's always a lot of fun to have folks on who are not just friends of PSMJ, but part of the PSMJ community. So Tim Griffin has been a PSMJ consultant, PSMJ instructor. Many of you might be familiar with Tim over the years. I've been at PSMJ 15 years and you've been here longer than me. So I'll let you do the math on that. But in addition to that, Tim has now written 3 books. He just released his 3rd book. I want to talk about that a little bit today. Tim's been an executive in RMF Engineering, kind of risen up through that. So it's just been a great resource. He's just always somebody who's fun to talk to and fun to work with. So Tim, thanks so much for joining us here on the AEC Growthcast. I hope it lives up to my hype of being the most anticipated.
You did set the bar kind of high. Thanks for that, Greg.
Tell us a little bit more about how you ended up where you are right now.
Wow, it's been a fun ride. I am an engineer by training and have been in the consulting engineering business for 37 years now. So I started when I was 5 years old, and it's been a great ride. About 10 years in, I became very interested in how the business side of what we do works. Went back and did an MBA to try to help figure that out. And that was very helpful. I didn't come from a family where people ran businesses. Everybody was employees. So this was just something I didn't understand and was fascinated about. However, the MBA world, particularly back then, really focuses on manufacturing firms. And it really came out of the Industrial Revolution. It didn't talk very much about professional service firms, which is what we do. And so after I was done with that program, I was trying to learn more about the business and was sitting next to a CEO from Boston, actually, at a conference. And I was pestering him about, well, how do I learn more about business? And he said, well, you ought to check out these guys called PSMJ. And I thought, well, who in the world is that? And I ended up signing up for a principal's boot camp 22 years ago, went to it and thought, wow, it's like drinking out of a fire hose. And for once I was getting information, I didn't have to filter through other industries. It was all specific to what I do and what we do. But I was just overwhelmed. It was so much information. And I remember the instructor at the end of class mentioned they were looking for speakers. And I thought, wow, if I could teach this, then I could really learn this. And so I walked up there and said, I'd like to be a speaker. And he said, you're too young. Now, Greg, unfortunately, it's been several years since I've been accused of being too young.
You don't get that as much anymore?
I don't know what it is, but I don't seem to get it as much anymore. I told him, I said, well, I just got an MBA. And he said, well, we really don't care about that. We care about people with a depth of experience in the industry. So, but to throw me a bone, he said, but you can write for our journal if you'd like and try it that way. So I jumped on it and I did that for about a year. And a year later, he reached back out and said, we need a speaker if you'd like to try out. 6 months process. And I got to train under some of the legends, Dave Burstein, Mike D'Alessandro in the business that have been doing it for years and just are such a wealth of knowledge and still are. So, but that gave me the opportunity to, on the side, over the last 20 years, actually, to do some training and to help firms with strategic planning, and even gave me the opportunity to write some about the industry. So it's just been a fantastic journey. I have recently announced with my firm that I have 5 days left in the office. So by the time this comes out, I will be officially retired as a consulting engineer and trying to slow the pace down a little bit, but also continuing to work as a consultant on the side because I enjoy it so much, and it'll keep my wife from wanting to kill me because I'm in her hair too much as well. So a lot to look forward to.
We're excited because we just get more of you now, Tim. We can do all sorts of fun stuff together. But yeah, that's an important point. And that's the thing I love about our team is the folks like you who not only are, delivering our programs, but all the while building a successful engineering firm. And when you're not teaching this stuff, you're actually in it every day. And that's what I love about your books too, is it's very hands-on, real world. The first book, Winning with Millennials, which was 2009 maybe?
2009. Yeah, 17 years ago.
Which Winning with Millennials was a pretty novel concept back then. Now, of course, the millennials are the ones trying to figure out how to win with the next generation. So before I do want to talk about the book, but I also think folks would enjoy hearing a little bit as you kind of look back, like you said, sort of at that point of retiring from your day job, but continuing to stay active with us here at PSMJ. What are kind of some of the leadership lessons or maybe even leadership tips, I guess, for people who are 15, 20 years behind you, rising up in the firm? What do you have to say to that?
That's a great question. I think as I think back to it, I approached my job when I was given the ability to start developing my first team many years ago. I decided to take the approach to look at it as a leadership laboratory. And the nice thing about that is you go to training and you read books on leadership. And what a leadership laboratory does is it gives you a place to come back and try it and see if it works or not. And when you have a lab, it doesn't matter if it works or not because it's data. And what doesn't work is just as valuable as what does work. So I've tried to approach my whole engineering career as a leader from that capacity. Don't be afraid to try things relative to leadership and pay attention to what works and what doesn't. And each year, your leadership skills should be increasing to some level. So I think as engineers, especially, and architects as well, we don't want to be wrong. And because of that, it keeps us from wanting to try novel things. But it also bugs the fool out of us when it doesn't work out like we intended. So if you can just change that mindset of thinking of it as a lab that you're experimenting and learning from, I think that it will free you up to really grow as a leader and learn what works and what doesn't.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. So in all your free time, you've now wrote your third book, Winning Work is the title, which I think is a topic just in the past few months. We're seeing more and more. It depends where you are in the industry, I guess I should say, but a realization that backlogs might be decreasing a little bit, workload might be slowing a little bit, a lot of uncertainty out there. A lot of firms have taken their eye off the ball in business development. So tell us a little bit about Winning Work and what triggered you to want to write this one?
Well, there was a very specific catalyst to it. I've been involved in pursuing work and project interviews since I was a young engineer here at the firm I'm with. And it's something that has been fascinating to me. And I've always wanted to figure out how to improve and to grow. And I've seen people do it well. I've seen people do it poorly. And I've learned from both. But I remember coming out of COVID. This was 5 years ago. And one of my business partners called me and said, "Hey, I just got COVID." And this was one of the last people I knew to get COVID. Everybody, all the rest of us already had it. But he was leading one of the offices that reported up through me, and he had a big interview for a very significant auditorium project in a town in our state, a mid-sized town. And it was a great project. And there was a national architect we were on the team with from the Boston area. There was a local architect that had a good reputation. They were teamed with several other engineering firms part of the process. There was a great team that was put together. And he told me they had gotten together and laid out their plan 2 or 3 weeks before through an online channel. And the interview was 2 days away, and he just needed me to pinch it for him. And I thought, I'll be glad to do that for you, because I certainly knew he would have done the same thing for me. So this team all flew in the night before the interview, and they were going to have a final practice session before the interview the next morning. So it's about a 2-hour drive. I drove there. I walked into the room. Here's 15 architects and engineers, stuff scattered everywhere. And as I introduced myself, when I sat down, I started watching, and I realized very quickly they had no plan. They had no presentation for the interview the next morning, and they were rapidly trying to pull something together. And as we say in the South, bless his heart, there was an architect sitting next to me that was rapidly pouring online, trying to find some video that he thought was cool he had seen 6 months ago on the internet to add to this interview. And it just went, we don't have a chance in the world of winning this job. How can quality firms like this make such a crucial error? We met for 3 hours. We got nowhere. Finally, the architects released most of the team and said, "Listen, we'll finish it up. We'll meet at 6 a.m. in the morning for the interview. We'll do our final run through." And about midnight, she called and said, "Hey, I think we've decided to change the team up to make it a smaller team. And so you don't need to be there." And I thought, well, thank God, because I don't want to see any more of this train wreck. But I got up early that next morning, and as I was driving back to the office over 2 hours, I called my wife, and I'm sitting there just venting about an opportunity missed and time wasted. And she surprised me. She said, "You keep getting frustrated about this. You need to write a book about it." And I thought, oh my gosh, now this is the same woman that was present when I wrote the first 2 books, which we had younger kids then. So it takes a lot of time, and could be frustrating to her that it was pulling me away from being able to help. So I knew when she said I needed to write a book that it was time to start. So I started 5 years ago with that idea and have been writing, pulling together, and collecting stories ever since.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, and I love seems like a big part of it is it isn't necessarily always the firm that has the biggest portfolio or the biggest team or whatever that wins the job. You can punch above your weight if you just think a little more strategically and a little smarter about it, right?
Interesting addendum to that story, Greg. There were 6 teams shortlisted. The team that I was on came in second. Now, what does that tell you?
Yeah.
The bar is really low, really low, which means that you may say, well, I'm an engineer, I'm an architect. How could I be good at this? You don't have to be that good to win.
Yeah.
You just have to be better than everybody else.
Let's get into that a little bit, Tim. So what are some kind of the big misconceptions you think firm leaders have about why they win or maybe why they lose projects?
Well, that's a great question too. I don't think for the most part they have any idea why they won or lost. And a lot of times, especially if they're losing, they say, well, it was politics, or somebody knows somebody, or something underhanded happened, or it just wasn't our turn, or we just didn't get lucky this time. But they don't grasp that they have some control over the outcome. And just recently, we hired a electrical engineer. It's a mid-level guy. He's turned out great. And we hired him from one of our competitors, and he had been with us about a year. And I was sitting in on his coaching review because I'm very impressed with this young man. And during the review, he was like, well, how do you like it here? He said, oh, I love it. This is a great place to work. And he said, the previous place I was working, they hate you guys. I went, hate? Hate's a pretty strong word. What did we do? I mean, I couldn't think of anything. I said, why did they hate us? He said, well, in 25 years, anytime they're shortlisted on a job and your firm is shortlisted, they've lost. And I thought, okay, now that sounds like an exaggeration. But I thought back over 25 years, I could not think of a single time we'd lost to that firm. So I asked him, I said, well, what's their approach to interviewing? The first thing he said, well, they chase everything. I thought, well, okay, and the second thing he said reminded me of the quote, if you keep doing the same thing over and over, you shouldn't expect different results. Well, they were doing every interview the same and expecting to get different results. So I'm surprised. Some of the best engineering firms I've had the opportunity to associate with, and especially architecture firms. You would think architects, because they're creative people, they're trained to communicate ideas, that you would think that they would be pretty good at something like a project interview. So it's just always surprising to me how bad generally we are.
So it's a big part of the book. It's won or lost in the interview, which is totally makes sense. You seem to love the interview part. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I'll start with your first question. Why do I love it? I think it's, of everything we do in our business, it's the most like sports. And what I mean by that, there's very few things that we do as architects or engineers where at the end of the day, you can quantify, did we win or did we lose, right? It was a great study we wrote. It was a great design we did, but how do you know? How do you compare it? But just like now, we're wrapping up the World Cup, and the World Cup starts with all these countries just trying to get in, just trying to make it to that first round. And then you get about 36 countries in, and then there's a knockout round, and you half that. And then after that point, every time there's a game, somebody's losing, till ultimately there's one winner and there's a whole bunch of losers. And I think that that's a great comparison to what we see with project interviews. Often on prestigious projects, you can have 30, 40, 50 proposals or more. And from there, there's a short list. And from there, one team's going to win and the other teams are going to lose. And it's not, there's no partial winners. If you're second, you're just first loser. So I like that there's feedback on success when you do win. Also, I think the other thing I like about it is similar to sports as well. It's very much like a David and Goliath moment. You're an underdog coming in against somebody that everybody thinks is going to win. So many people shy away from those opportunities, but to me, that's when my juices really get flowing. And I think back to that David and Goliath story. Here David came in and he looked at his opponent and said, okay, this guy's strong, he's big, he's powerful, but he's also overconfident. And he was able to approach with a strategy that leveraged his strengths, his mobility, his speed, his ability to think out of the box and come at him in a way that wasn't expected. And he won in doing that. And many, many times I've been able to lead teams against Goliaths that were expecting to get the work and often complacent because of that. And were really right to come in with a creative approach and to beat. And, the satisfaction that comes out from winning and knowing you're won when the odds certainly seem stacked against you, there's not quite a feeling that matches that to me in this business. So I love it.
What is the winning recipe in the interview that you see?
Yeah, well, there's a lot to the recipe. It starts with knowing who's leading your team. A lot of times we get into this hot potato. We just got shortlisted. Well, who's leading it? Well, not me, not me, not me. In my experience, 28 years, I've never seen us win a job where we were playing hot potato on who was going to lead it.
Yeah.
First key is somebody's got to step up and say, I'm going to take the responsibility for pulling the team together, coming up with the strategy, and making sure it gets delivered. But then you've got to figure out who your competitors are. That's one of the most important questions, because without knowing who your competition is, how do you figure out how do you differentiate yourself from them? Next, you've got to know who the audience is, who's on the selection committee, so you can figure out what is it that matters to them. Not only do I have to differentiate myself from the competitors, it has to be a difference that matters to this particular audience. And that's kind of the start of how you start pulling together what your story is. There's a whole lot of science behind it too. The rule of threes. Scientists have found that people remember things better when you talk in threes and you share three ideas to support why you're a better versus 4, 5, or more. And engineers in particular are bad about this. We want to tell them every reason they should hire us. And we might have 100 reasons. And certainly the more you tell them, the less they remember. So being focused in your approach and only talking about what matters and having the guts not to try to dive into all the rest. Those are some of the key thoughts to start thinking about how you pull together that story that wins.
Yeah, it seems like that ties right into those are the things that the sort of best in class seller doers do differently, right? I mean, they understand the client, they understand the competition. Kind of the sports analogy there too, right, Tim? I mean,
Absolutely.
you got to watch some film, understand who you're playing here and what their where your angle is.
I talked about in the book the Super Bowl, the Eagles, and the Kansas City. There's something about the 2 weeks before the Super Bowl that has, as I've gotten older, has become the most fascinating part of the game to me, because it's also like a project interview. The coaches are sitting down, and there's some of the coaches are thinking about what are our strengths that we're going to use to attack them. Some are thinking about what are our weaknesses that they're going to try to attack us with. How do we offset those weaknesses and leverage our advantages? You know who's available, you know who's not available. You have all the information, and you're putting your brains together trying to think about how do we come up with a strategy to beat the other team. The Eagles recognized that they had the best running back in the league in Saquon Barkley. And they also correctly realized that Kansas City was going to make their focus on shutting him down. So instead of just saying, well, we're going to run the ball down the throat, they decided to use him as a decoy and leverage everything else that was going to open up in the rest of the game. And it was amazing to watch. And it was even shocking because at halftime, you would think Kansas City would have gone in and said, all right, we got to change our strategy. But they weren't able to make adjustments at that point. So yeah, in football, coaching matters, especially when you're getting to that level. It's the same idea with the interviews. You have to understand what are your strengths you're going to sell, what are your opponents going to try to sell that you have to offset and minimize in order to win that project.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I'd love to talk a little bit, projects are moving faster. A lot of the generational change that we talk about on the architecture engineering side is happening on the client side as well. But from your perspective, you've been in it for a while now. How do you see client expectations and business development different now than, say, 10 years ago?
I think the biggest change goes all the way back to the first book I wrote in 2009 about millennials. And just looking at the data then, it was very obvious to me that the need for talent and the war for talent was about to get worse than it had ever been. And it was going to stay that way. And you could just look at demographics. You could look at people retiring. You could look at the need for engineers and architects. And that has played out very much like the data suggested it would. Now, how does that impact interviewing? What I've seen with our clients during my career, if you think it's hard for us to find good people, good engineers and architects, it's harder for them because they often don't have the ability to pay and the benefits and the career opportunities that we can offer. So what's happening is their need to get us to help them more in non-engineering and architectural responsibilities, but project management client management, communication, all those kinds of things is growing and is going to continue to grow. So now what that also means is their willingness to hire teams based on qualifications, and in particular to go after teams that are going to make their job easier because their job is getting to be really difficult, is growing as well. So this is a huge opportunity. That means if we're good at these things and we get ourselves out of our traditional engineering and architecture box, there's all kinds of bolt-on services we can sell that add value and that we can get paid for, but at the same time also differentiate us from our competition as well. I expect that trend to continue because the demographics aren't getting better and the need for architects and engineers is only going up. So I'm seeing staff sizes, facility staff sizes on campuses and clients and manufacturers continuing to shrink and relying on their outside partners more.
One other thing I'd love to get your input on. So you talked a little bit, that importance of kind of creating that team that's going to kill the interview because they're going to be prepared. They're going to understand what to look at, how to develop a winning strategy. So how do you develop the people that have that mindset, I guess? How do you teach that? How do you build a culture where people have that instinct for nailing the interview and winning work and growing the firm?
When I got excited about interviews and winning work, my first task was to learn to do it myself. And the nice thing, I was fairly young. My hair wasn't as blonde then. It's lightened up some since then. And I was believable. So if I was in an interview, I was believable then that they were going to see me on the project because I was young enough. As I got older, I found that as my hair lightened up, it was harder for them to believe I was going to be on the project. So I needed to train others to be able to interview. And so I took that on as the next step. Then the third step was 8 years ago, I got a chance to take over our corporate marketing team. And my thought was, how do we institutionalize this? How do we create processes where everybody is using best practices kind of automatically without even having to think about it? And it's worked very well. For the last 3 years, we've won over 50% of our interviews. So if we get to the interview point, we've got a really good chance of winning. But how do you get there? The first step, I think, is you have to communicate to people that power comes to those who bring in work, and especially to people in their 20s. And I remember being a young engineer in my 20s, and my boss said, hey, I'm going to take you to a client review on the project you're working on. It's the first time I'd done that. I thought, well, that's really neat. I get to get out of the office. And we're sitting there and they're reviewing the plans. And in the middle of the discussion, the lead client looked at my boss and said, hey, are you guys busy? And my boss kind of leaned back and said, well, we could use more work. And I went, more work? Are you kidding? We can't get done what we have now. Greg, my boss had a long talk with me on the ride back to the office, and he explained something I didn't know. You can't wait till you're not busy to start marketing. When you're in your 20s, you see winning work as making your job harder because now you may be working some evenings and having to work on the weekends. And so what I've worked to teach people is over time, power comes to those who can bring in work. So they start thinking about it at the younger age. The other thing is, if you're a leader, how do you create that culture? When somebody brings in work, particularly if they're younger, celebrate it. Celebrate it loudly. Let everybody hear you, because then people are always trying to do what their bosses want them to do. They just often can't figure out what it is. So by celebrating, people start going, let me see if I can get my client to give us another project. The third thing I would say, and one of the things I'm most proud of at the RMF, the company I'm with, is Toastmasters. It's not about mastering toast and getting it brown on both sides just right, but it's about making a toast at a wedding, making a short speech. It's an international club that's been around for, I think it goes back to like the 20s. And I had a sales rep years ago when I was in my 20s invite me to a class. And I went to it, and only because there was free dinner. That's why I went to it. But I got introduced to it. And then later I got involved with the club as I was starting to interview. And it really helped my presentation skills. And so what I did was try to get young people to participate in these clubs. We have a club that meets in our office that's had over 300 meetings. So it's been going on for
It meets
many
at
years.
an RMF office?
It's an RMF
Oh, that's
club.
great.
And now our home office and our other biggest office, they have their own clubs as well. As engineers, we are not naturally good public speakers, architects as well. Toastmasters is a safe environment that will help you become adequate at public speaking. And adequate at public speaking is much better than your typical engineer or architect. So I have seen that club really change people's lives. And I think some of our hit rate and success has been our people have some practice at standing up in front of people and presenting without freezing up and just knowing some of the basics. And it really shows differently. Now, here's the interesting thing about that I didn't expect. I brought in Toastmasters primarily to help us win more work. What it did, though, was it helped us be better at delivering quality work. Because if you're a project manager, you've got to lead meetings all the time. Sometimes you have to go in front of boards of trustees to present on a project, review committees, whatever it is. The same skills that helped us win work also helped us to be better at delivering engineering services. And that was a surprise to me, but it was a happy surprise.
Makes sense. I mean, a big part of a project manager's job, communicating change, difficult conversations, managing conflict, all that stuff. So yeah, makes total sense.
And if there's a young person listening, young engineer or architect, as you move up in your career, there's going to be more of a need for you to stand up in front of people and speak. Now that may freak you out, but start preparing now. Every city has Toastmasters clubs.
Yeah.
And, they're a wonderful way to really up your game with that very important skill.
That's awesome. Yeah. And so important too, Tim, about the piece of winning work, even when you're buried. Entry-level professionals oftentimes just assume there's kind of that backlog closet that's always full. And the more looking at leadership skills that can help you advance in the firm, that's a big one right there for sure. It's just kind of realizing the power, like you said, of winning work and the role that plays in the firm. So what's the next book, Tim? Fill us in.
I don't think there is one, but I didn't think this one was there either. Every book so far, I've often told my mother, I said, if my high school English teacher found out I wrote a book, she'd have a heart attack because I'm an engineer. That's not, English is my second language. I just don't have a first language.
Yeah.
So, but thank goodness for good editors. I tell the story and they do a great job of helping me sound intelligent.
Yeah.
I was I love a Freakonomics as a podcast and was listening to Steve Levitt about the time that I got the idea for this book. And he's written a couple books and he says, you shouldn't write a book unless you have an idea that's just burning inside you that you've got to get out. And I thought, wow, that's exactly right. And when the Millennials book, I first started writing that, it was in response to hearing so many principals in the industry at the time saying these kids from college are just driving us nuts. And I thought, I'm getting some of these people from this generation and they're building a high-powered team. So they just kind of started me down that path. So I think with this book, it was the same thing. So is there another book in me? I don't know. There won't be unless there's a real burning something that comes up down the road. And if that never happens, I'll be fine because it's an awful lot of work. So.
Yeah, you bet. So Winning Work, you can find it on Amazon if you just search Tim Griffin, Winning Work. We'll put a link to it on the show notes. You can also find it at psmj.com in our bookstore. It's out there. Tim's also speaking at AEC Thrive, and we'll be sharing a little more insight from books at psmj.com to learn more. AEC Thrive is in Scottsdale, Arizona in October, so be sure to check that out. Maybe Tim will even sign a copy for you. I don't know. There'll be a big crowd. He's hard to break through security there, but for sure. Well, Tim, thanks so much for joining me. Really appreciate it.
Greg, thanks for having me. Appreciate what you do and all that PSMJ has done for our industry for so many years.
Well, we're lucky to have you. For sure. Thanks, Tim. Okay, great conversation with Tim there. So important to understand that piece about the project interview that is often overlooked. When we talk about business development, we often talk about the more upstream, getting more proposals out, finding more opportunities, and overlooking that most important part, which is winning it at the interview. So always good to talk to Tim. Hopefully you enjoyed that and got some good tips out of that. We're going to shift gears a tiny bit when we talk about the AEC business model. We sell the work, we do the work, and we get paid for the work. So we're talking about selling the work there. Now we're going to shift a little bit and talk about getting paid for the work. So another interesting statistic from PSMJ's 2026 AE Financial Performance Benchmark Survey Report was that both accounts receivable collection in days of gross revenue and WIP, work in process, were both at all-time lows, at least in recent history, which means we're getting paid faster and we're sitting on it. We're spending less time before we get the invoice out. Basically, that's what work in process is, right? Work that's been completed but not billed yet. So we're getting faster, we're getting more diligent. That takes a lot of pressure off of cash flow in the organization and reduces the reality, I guess, in some cases, of being a financer or providing interest-free loans, I guess is another way to say it, for clients and for projects. We're getting paid faster. So we have better cash flow in the organization and less money that's tied up in, again, loans, which is unpaid receivables to clients, for lack of a better term. So 5-minute fix for this episode is a question that came up in our PSMJ Pro discussion forum. For those of you not familiar with PSMJ Pro, it is our community of about 1,500 or so AE firm leaders from all corners of the industry, big firm, small firm, architecture, engineering. And that includes the PSMJ Journal, which has been around since the start of PSMJ more than 50 years ago, but also includes our PSMJ Pro discussion forum, where members can ask questions about challenges they're running into, vendor recommendations, all that sort of stuff on virtually every topic associated with firm management. If you want to enter a question in there, learn more at psmj.com. You can go to PSMJ Pro in the networks in the top nav on the page and learn more about that. But this is a question we got from the PSMJ Pro discussion forum, which, by the way, also got a lot of great comments from other members. This is going to be anonymized and redacted. I doubt we are alone, but we seem to always have a few problems with receivables out over 90 days. First, we're not great at sticking to our guns and charging interest, but when we do, clients never want to pay it. Our CFO is pushing to charge and collect interest on all past due invoices. Is that a good approach? And again, lots of good feedback and perspectives on that in the discussion forum. I'll give you the kind of short answer. Well, it's never a short answer, it seems, with the 5-minute fix, but I'll give you the answer that makes the most sense based on our perspective and our experience here at PSMJ. It's a great bargaining tool. Rarely do firms end up actually collecting on that interest, but it's a great piece of leverage to some extent, though it's not really great leverage, but a great way to create a sense of urgency and get the attention of said late payer. Now, there's a couple caveats to that. Number one, on the invoices, absolutely set up or break it out rather as a fee associated with the interest. Don't just roll it in. Don't just bundle it in as amount due, but really call that out as the late fee, the interest that's accruing on that invoice. That gets a lot more attention than if it's just rolled in. They don't even realize that you're starting to charge interest in there. The other thing too, well, first of all, make sure before you do any of this stuff, it needs to be in your contract, right? If you don't have language in your contract that you charge interest, you're going to have a lot less leverage with that. Sometimes you're dealing with a client's contract or another contract that doesn't have that piece in it. So that's another can of worms right there. But if you can get it, you should always have it in your contract. So if you can get it in any other contract, you should as well. The other piece, there's a few things that we see that don't specifically relate to that interest, okay? A lot of firms, especially with, newer clients, riskier, claim-prone clients, ones that you would put in some way, shape, or form are higher risk or unproven with the firm, get as much as you can paid up front in a mobilization fee or a retainer, or whatever you want to call it. Some cases 50% in an upfront payment. That reduces your risk exposure if there is a late payment. The other thing I would say, there are things you can do on the invoice that don't specifically relate to the interest fee, but will get you paid faster. At the project inception, share an invoice template with the client. Sometimes it's as little as an internal client project ID number or something like that that holds things up or gets it kicked out of their system, okay? Sometimes, of course, it's a deeper issue than that, but in many cases, it can be a clerical or administrative issue that's holding up the invoice. The other thing that's a huge piece, if you want to talk about leverage to get paid, much more leverage is holding up deliverables. Now, we used to say years ago, you would, for those of you who've been around a little bit that might remember this, we would say, send the deliverables when you would send the physical hard deliverables via COD, which was cash on delivery. I'm not sure the post office even does COD anymore. And of course, a lot of stuff isn't going in physical form, but deliverables are leverage. So what a lot of firms will do, create a threshold, say 60 days. And at that point, there are no deliverables that go out until the overdue invoice is paid. PMs hate this, right? Because now it's getting the PM in the middle of it, which is where they should be. But your leverage is in the deliverable, okay? So don't, and again, this has to be in your you need to have some language in your contract about non-payment and about the consequences associated with non-payment. You do that without this in your contract, and you could create a breach issue that creates a much bigger problem for you. But get that in your contract. The deliverable is your leverage, and have a policy internally. Anything over 60 days, no deliverable goes out, gets escalated up to the principal in charge to deal with that issue, okay? There's some other little things you can do. We can go down all sorts of rabbit holes with getting paid faster, but there's a lot of other little things you can do too. Getting invoices out much faster. A lot of firms after month end might sit on the invoice for weeks. Shouldn't be more than a couple days that you should be able to get that invoice out. If you're waiting for perfect timesheets, don't worry about it. Make a fix on the next invoice if there's a correction due to a timesheet change. A culture of getting invoices out faster is going to, right at the outset, start getting you paid faster, in addition to some of the things I mentioned. So short answer, yes and no. Long answer is always charge for it. Always have it in there in your contract language and have it as a piece of leverage, but don't expect that it's going to be a giant source of revenue. Don't expect that you'll actually end up collecting on that interest, but it's a piece of leverage you absolutely should have in there where you can. So that's our 5-minute fix. And that brings us to a close for this episode of the AEC Growthcast. We covered a lot. We'll include, as I mentioned, Tim's book in the show notes. We'll include a link to the AE Financial Performance Benchmark Survey in the show notes as well. If you've enjoyed this episode, be sure to like, comment, subscribe wherever you consume this podcast. And of course, we want to hear from you. If there's a guest idea or a topic you want to see us covering in the future, we'll drop that email address in the show notes as well that you can contact us. We'd love to hear from you. That's it for now. Thanks, everybody.